Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Chaf Beis Amud Aleph, 22a of Maseches Kiddushin. We are 6 lines down on the page, towards the end of the line. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in a brisa. So we're still discussing the Eved Ivri, the Jewish slave, and specifically we are talking about an Eved Ivri who decides that he wants to stay on longer than his 6-year term, and he becomes a nirtza, he gets his ear pierced, and then he stays on longer. So the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Im Amor Yomar. So that's a quote from the Pasuk. The Pasuk says, in describing the process of becoming a nirtza, of having his ear pierced, it says, Im Amor Yomar ha'eved, if the eved would say, if the slave will surely say, a double language, Im Amor Yomar ha'eved, and what is it that he says? The Pasuk goes on to say, Ahavti es ishti es adoni es ishti vespanai. I love my master, my wife, my children. Lo eitzei chafshi. I don't want to go out free. So then you go through this process of piercing his ear, and he becomes this nirtza. So the Gemara says, the Bryce says, it uses a double language, Im Amor Yomar, if he surely will say. So the Gemara understands, the Brisa says, Ad sheyomar v'yishna, then he has to say it twice. It's until he says it and repeats it. Because it uses this double language, he has to say this twice in order to be, to stay on and have his ear pierced and become a nirtza. Now the Brisa goes on, and it says, Amar b'tchila sheish, v'lo amar b'sof sheish. Now if these 2 times, if he says them at the beginning of the 6 years, but he doesn't say them at the end of the 6 years, Eino nirtza. He doesn't become a nirtza, he doesn't get his ear pierced. That does not suffice. Shenemar, because the pasuk says, Lo eitzei chafshi, that he has to say, part of what he says is, I won't go out, I don't want to go out free. So Ad sheyomar, says the Bryce, until he says it, b'shas yitziyah, at the time of going out, since part of what he says is, I don't want to go out free. So we learn from there that his declaration of, I love my master, my wife, my children, I don't want to go out, has to be at the time that he's supposed to go out. At least one of the 2 times has to be then. So if he says it only at the beginning, and he doesn't say it at the end, so then it doesn't work. Amar b'sof sheish, v'lo amar b'tchila sheish. And if he only says it at the end, but he doesn't say it at the beginning of the 6, Eino nirtza. He also doesn't get his ear pierced, he doesn't stay on. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Im Amor Yomar ha'eved. If the eved will say, Ad sheyomar kishehu eved, until he says it while he is an eved. He can't just say it after he's an eved. That's not enough. He has to say it while he is an eved. So therefore, while he's still a slave. So if he would only say it at the end and not at the beginning, that wouldn't suffice. So, at face value at least, we're going to have to, the Gemara is going to break down this brisa, but it seems to be saying that he has to say it twice, that's clear. And he has to say it both at the beginning of the 6 years and at the end of the 6 years. He can't just say it at the beginning, because it says that he says, I don't want to go out. So we understand from there he has to say it when he's about to go out, at the end. And he also can't say it just at the end because it says, Im Amor Yomar ha'eved, that he has to still be a slave when he says it. So therefore he says it at the beginning. Now it's a little strange to me that he would be saying it at the beginning. First of all, he doesn't even have any children yet, right? So the Gemara he doesn't have a wife yet from that his master's giving him, that he would say, I want to stay on. So, and also, how does he know he has to know at the beginning that he wants to stay on longer? So, the Gemara is going to explore this brisa further. So the Gemara says, Amar Mar, the master said. So that's usually a quote from the brisa. We're examining what was said in the brisa. Amar b'tchila sheish v'lo amar b'sof sheish eino nirtza. The brisa said that if he says it at the beginning of the 6, but not at the end of the 6, eino nirtza, he doesn't get his ear pierced, and he doesn't stay on. Shenemar, because the pasuk says, Lo eitzei chafshi, I do not want to go out free, and we said that implies that he has to say it when he's going out. Says the Gemara, My iryam yulo eitzei chafshi. Why do I care to learn it from here? Why do I need to learn it from the fact that it says I won't go out free, so it must be that he says it when he goes out. I have a better argument to prove that it can't be that he only says it at the beginning. Tepuglei, let me learn it out from Dibalina Nahabtis Adonias Ishti Vespanai Veleka. So like we just mentioned, learn it out from the fact that he has to say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, and that he can't say at the beginning. He hasn't been given a wife and children from becoming a slave yet. He just became a slave. He doesn't know if he loves his master. He can't say that at the beginning. So obviously this declaration has to be made at the end. So that's one question. Why does it have to learn it from the fact that he says, I won't go out? I don't want to go out free, which means he has to say it when he's going out. To learn it out from the fact that what he says is, I love my master, my wife, and my kids. And obviously he can't say that when he first becomes a slave. Visu, and furthermore, we look at the other part of the Brisa. It says, Amar b'sof sheish v'lo amar b'tchila sheish. It says if he only says it at the end, but he doesn't say it at the beginning of the 6 years, Eino nirtza, he doesn't get his ear pierced, shenemar ha'eved. It says the slave, that he has to still be a slave. Says the Gemara, Atu sof sheish lav evedu. At the end of the 6 years, is he not still a slave? Meaning, the Gemara is assuming he can't say it after the 6 years are over, then he's already free, it's too late. So, it must be that he's saying it at the end, on the last day. But on the last day, he's still a slave. So, he is an Eved. So what do we mean he must say it at the beginning because at the end he's not a slave? He is a slave. It's the last day of his term, but he's still a slave. So, comes along Rava and he sort of reinterprets this brisa for us that it makes much more sense. Amar Rava said, "My betchila sheish." What does the brisa mean that he has to say it at the beginning of the 6 years? It doesn't mean at the beginning of the 6 years. Betchila sheish means betchilas pruta achrona. It means at the beginning of the final pruta. Umay besof sheish, and what does it mean? The end of the 6, the end of his term? Besof pruta achrona, at the end of the final pruta. What does this mean? So what Rava is saying is, we know from the Brisa he has to say it twice. And he has to say it when he's about to go out. When he says, Lo eitzei chavshi, I don't want to go out, so he must be about to go out at the very end of his term. He also has to say it when he's still an Eved, when he's still a slave. And he has to say it twice. So, says Rava, what it means is, he has to say it once before the final pruta, and once during the final pruta. What do we mean by the final pruta? So this slave was sold for a certain amount, for 6 years. And so you can sort of prorate the value of each day and each hour based on how much the original cost was. So when let's just say for this simplicity, although this wouldn't actually happen, I'm sure, but let's just say he was sold for 6 prutas for the 6 years. So then the final year would be the final pruta, right? That he'd be working through that final pruta in the final year. So that's just the most simple of examples. Obviously, you wouldn't be sold for 6 years for just 6 prutas, which is just a few cents. But that's just for simplicity's sake. So that final term, that final period of time of that pruta, it's probably in a normal case only an hour or something. So that final time, that's the key here. You have to say it once before, because you have to still be an Eved. And even though he's still an Eved during that final hour, that final pruta, but he's, in a certain sense, he's not an Eved anymore, because he's not even worth a pruta. His work isn't even worth a pruta at this point. So he has to say it while he's still an Eved before that final pruta, because once he hits that point, he's, in a certain sense, not even an Eved anymore, because he's not worth anything anymore, his work. So it's not worth any amount of significance, it's less than a pruta. But he also has to say it when he's about to go out. When is he about to go out? During that final pruta stage. So he has to say it during that final pruta stage as well. So that's what the Bryce is saying. When it said that he has to say it in the beginning of the 6, it didn't really mean the beginning of the 6 years. It meant the beginning of the last pruta of the 6 years. And when it said he has to say it at the end of the 6 years, it meant during that last pruta, the end of that last pruta of the 6 years. That's the 2 times that he has to say it. Okay. Says the another brisa. Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught. Lo isha ubanim ularabo ein isha ubanim. Let's say the slave has a wife and children, but his master doesn't have a wife and children. Eino nirtza. He can't have his ear pierced. He can't stay on. Why? Shenemar, as the pasuk says, there's another pasuk that talks about him staying on, and it says it will be when he will say to you, I don't want to go out, ki ahevcha ve'es beisecha, because I love you and I love your household. Ki tov lo imach, for it is good for him with you. So it says there that he says, I love you and I love your household. So we see that the master there has to be a master with a household, with a wife and children. Otherwise, this parsha isn't relevant. So the Gemara is taking these psukim, these verses very literally, that he has to be able to say all these things in order to stay on. So he has to be able to say that to the master, I love you and your household. So if the master doesn't have a household, he can't say that. He can't become a nirtza. What if it's the opposite? What if l'rabo isha banim v'lo ein isha banim? What if his master does have a wife and children, but the slave doesn't have a wife and children? Eino nirtza. He can't get pierced and he can't stay on. Shenemar, because it says, the first verse that we started with, that he has to say, Ahavti es adoni es ishti v'es panai. He has to say, I love my master, my wife, and my children. So he has to have a wife and children in order to become a nirtza. Hu ohev es rabo v'rabo engo ohavo. What if the slave loves his master, but the master doesn't love him? Eino nirtza. He can't be pierced, he can't stay on. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Ki tov lo imach. That the pasuk says that it is good for him with you. Speaking to the master, but it's good for him with you, which we learn from here that I guess it has to be imach. It has to be with you. That it has to be good for both of them. They both have to like each other in order for him to become a nirtza. What if it's the opposite? Or it could be that that's coming from a different angle. That tov lo imach has to be good for the slave with the master. And if the master doesn't love the slave, then it won't be good for him. Maybe that's where it's coming from. Ki tov lo imach, it's good for him with you. So only if it's good for him with you, if the master loves him, do we say that he becomes a nirtza. Rabo ohavo v'hu eino ohevis rabo. What if it's the opposite? What if the master loves him, but the slave doesn't love the master? Eino nirtza. Also then he doesn't get his ear pierced. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, ki ahevcha, that the slave says, I love you. So he has to say, I love you. So it has to be that the slave loves the master also. Hu chole v'rabo eino chole. What if the slave is sick, but the master is not sick? Eino nirtza. He doesn't get pierced. He doesn't stay on. Shenemar ki tov lo imach. It says that it's good for him with you. And if he's sick, it's not good for him. Rabo chole v'hu eino chole. What if the master is sick, but the slave isn't? Eino nirtza. He doesn't get pierced. Shenemar imach. It says with you. So that with you we learn that it has to be good for both of you. You both have to be in good condition. So, as opposed to if he's sick, if either of them are sick. Says the Gemara, Bai Rabbi bar Abaye. Rabbi bar Abaye asked a question. Shneihem cholin mai. What if they're both sick? Both the master and the slave. Do we say, imach ba'inan v'le'eka? Do we say, what you need is with you? They have to be on the same level. They have to be the same. So if they're both sick, it's fine. You could stay, because you have imach, you have with you, you have the unity that's necessary. O Dilma, or maybe, ki tov lo imach ba'inan. It has to be good for him with you. V'le'eka, and that we don't have teku. So that we end with a teku, we end with a question. So it seems that in understanding this brisa, Rabbi bar Abaye wasn't sure when we talk about a chola, a sick person, what's the main point here? Is it the matter of tovlo, whether it's good, or whether it's imach, whether it's with you, that you need consistency? So if only one of them is sick, the other's not, then you don't have either. Because you don't have tov, you don't have good, you don't have imach, you don't have consistency, you don't have unity between them. But what if they're both sick? So that's where he's left with this question, what's the main point here? Is it to have that they're unified, that they're the same, or is it that it has to be tov lo, it has to be good? The Gemara leaves off with a teku. That is not sure. Next, Brisa says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ki tov lo imach, for it is good for him with you. And we learn from there that it has to be good for the slave with the master. Imach b'machal, he's with you in food. And imach b'mishta, and he's with you in drinks. What does that mean? Shalote ata ochel pas nikiyav, hu ochel pas kiber. That it can't be that the master eats bread of fine flour, and the slave eats bread of coarse flour. It has to be that they get the same quality bread. Ata shosa yayin yashan, v'hu shosa yayin chadash. And it can't be that the master drinks old wine, which is good, and that the slave drinks new wine, which is not as good. Ata yashain al gabe mochin. It can't be that the master sleeps on soft sheets, hu yashain al gabe tevin, and that the slave has to sleep on straw. Rather, it has to be imach, that the slave is entitled to the same comforts as the master. Mikar amru, and from here, the sages said, Kolakona eved ivri, kikona adam la'atzma. Anybody who acquires a Jewish slave, it's like he acquired a master. Because you have, although he has responsibilities to the master, but you, as the master, have so many responsibilities to him, it's almost as if you acquired a master for yourself. Because you have to give him the same quality life as you enjoy. The same food, the same bed, etc. Another brisa, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, V'yatsa me'imach hu ubanav imo. Another pasuk says, with regards to the Eved Ivri, it says that he shall go out from you, he and his sons with him. And he goes back to his family. Amar Reb Shimon said, Imhu nimkar banav uvnosa minimkarim. If he's sold, but are his children sold? What does it mean that his children go back? That they go out with him? And it can't be referring to the children that he had from a relationship with the Canaanite maidservant, with the Shifcha Canaanis, because there it says, Hayishav yiladet yal adoneha, that the woman and her children belong to the master, they don't go out. So when it says that the children go out, that the slave will go out with his children, it must mean his children from before he became a slave. So why are they here even? What does it mean? Do they get sold with him? The Torah never talks about that. So says Reb Shimon Mikan, from here we learn Sherabo Chai b'mizonos banav, that the master also is responsible for supporting the children and feeding them. And so they come. I guess they do come along. They're not sold, but he has to feed them, so they come along. And then when the slave goes out, then they go home with him. Kayotze b'davar ata omer. Similarly, we say, Im ba'al ishahu v'yatza yishto imo. It says also about the slave that if he is the husband of a wife, if he has a wife, so she goes out with him as well. Amar Reb Shimon said the same thing. Imhu nimkar ishto mi nimkares. If he got sold but his wife gets sold, what does it mean she goes out with him? She's not a slave. Mikan, so from here we learn Sherabo Chai b'mizonos ishto. From here we learn that the master is also responsible for the wife's food. If the slave had a wife, then the master not only feeds the slave, he has to feed the wife as well. Utsricha. And says the Gemara, it was necessary to teach me both. It was necessary to teach me that the master has to feed the slave's children, and it's necessary to teach me that he has to feed the Jewish slave's wife. Why? Di'iyashmu inan banav. If it had only taught me that he has to feed the children, then I would have said he has to feed them, but not the wife. Why? Because the children are children, they're not able to work and to provide for themselves. So who's going to provide for them? So of course the master has to provide for them. Aval ishto, but the man's wife, the slave's wife, debas mechol me'avadi, she can work and eat, she can feed herself, she can support herself. So maybe the master wouldn't be responsible for her. Ema tavid v'teichel. Amir said that she has to work and eat. That's why the Torah has to teach me, that's why Reb Shimon has to teach me, that no, the master also has to pay for her food. V'iyash ma'inan ishto, and if it had only taught me that he has to feed the wife, that I might say, Delav dircha lahaduri. That's because, what are you going to say? We can't expect her to go knocking on doors and begging. She's a woman. It's not proper. It's not respectful for her to have to do that. So maybe we'll say that's where the master has to feed her. But the children, didirchayu lahaduri, that it's not beneath them to go knocking on doors and to go begging. Amalo. Maybe I would say that the master doesn't have to feed them. Where are they going to get food from? They'll go begging for it. They'll knock on doors and they'll be fed. Tzricha. That's why I need both. That's why it's necessary to teach me that indeed the master is responsible for both feeding the wife of the Jewish slave and any children that he already has. Thank you for listening. See you next time.